Praise Father, Son.
Praise Father, Son.
Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Morning, everybody. Would you stand and sing this with us today? All people that on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. Him serve with fear, His praise foretell. Come ye before Him and rejoice. Oh, enter then His gates with praise. Approach with joy His courts unto. Praise God and bless His name always, for it is seemly so to do. For why the Lord our God is good, His mercy is forever sure. His truth at all times firmly stood, and shall from age to age endure. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him all creatures here below. Praise Him above ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Praise Father, Son.
Praise Father, Son.
Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Well, good morning, everybody. We want to enter in His gates with praise as we just sang that song, and let's sing another one together. Join your voices together this morning. Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you or evil a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. Would you be free from your passion and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for cleansing to Calvary's tide. There's wonderful power in the blood. There's power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be whiter, much whiter than snow? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Sin stains are lost in its life-giving flow. There's wonderful power in the blood. Would you do service for Jesus your King? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily His blood. There's power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Amen. Well, you can be seated, and we're going to ask our guys to prepare to receive our offering this morning in just a moment. If you've brought an offering and you need to get ready to place that in the basket, just to let you know, they'll be doing that during our next song today. And I wanted to draw your attention this morning to the newsletter that you received when you walked in, or I hope you did. If you didn't, you can receive one as you leave today in either of the lobbies. And in there, we've given you a tentative year-end report to show where we ended up last year, which thankfully we ended up in the black, and so we're really thankful for that at the end of the fiscal year. We even had enough left over at the end of our fiscal year to replace our copy machine, and for some of you that means nothing, but for those of you who use it, you'd be really happy to know that we replaced that thing. So it's here, it's ready to be installed back there. So we just thank you for being faithful in your giving, faithful to God, good stewards of what He's given us. And this morning in that newsletter, I've put in my article, a summary of next year's budget for you to take a look at, see how we've forecasted our giving and expenses for this coming year as our fiscal year runs October through September. So that's what we wanted to bring to your attention this week as we come to our offering time, and let's continue singing together as the guys collect those gifts now. Before even time began, my life was in His hand. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. I have a Father. He calls me His own. He'll never leave me, no matter where I roam. Me when I call, and He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. Me when I call. Great is Thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow
much this morning that you're a faithful God, that you're a God who is our Creator, who reigns high above us, who knows all things, the things that we can't even begin to comprehend. You do. And yet, you know our name. You want to know us personally. You know everything about us. And so this morning, with us knowing that, help us to be surrendered to you, open to your word, open to what you want to teach us this morning through your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. This morning, I'll introduce a speaker that you probably don't, for most of you, don't need an introduction. His name is Lloyd Pelfrey, and he was been here for a long time. He was the president of the college, I think, for over 30 years. And so we're excited. He preaches, honestly, at churches all over the place. That's why he's not here a lot of the time. And this morning, in part of our transition time, we thought you would enjoy hearing the word from him this morning. So would you welcome Mr. Pelfrey?
Thank you, Brian. I told him to be nice in the introduction, just say nice things. He did a good job, so. Message this morning is a part of the series of sermons you've had going on the Gospel of John. And the text assigned to me was part of John 18, part of John 19, that covered the life of Pilate as described in the book of John. So we'll get right into it. Do the text. 4 verses I want to read. Okay, there we go. Okay. From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you're not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold, your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. As I said, here at Timberlake, we've had sermons based on the Gospel of John for quite some time. And if we're going to talk about Pilate today, hey, that's nice. They put his chair there for me as an old man. If I get tired, I can sit down. But I can lean on it too. It was said that when Alexander Campbell spoke, he had a cane. He would lean forward on the cane. I'm not quite there yet, but it may be sometime soon. Anyway, one response to the sermon with this title could be something like this: "I've heard all this before. Maybe I should take a nap." I hope that will not be the case, for it's my goal to try to provide some material for you that you probably haven't heard before, and then to challenge you to allow the thrust of the sermon to make a difference in your life. But first, a little bit of humor just to wake you up. A Sunday school teacher was having a lesson at Christmas time, and she told about how the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, baby Jesus, had to flee from Bethlehem, Jerusalem, wherever they were, and go to Egypt. And she asked us class, each one, to take some crayons, and draw a picture of the Holy Family on their flight to Egypt. So the children all got busy. They were drawing pictures of donkeys. And Mary was sitting on the donkey, holding the baby. Joseph was leading the donkey. And then one boy had a picture that was different. She asked him, why did you draw it like that? He said, "You have an airplane." And that's probably not the way they went. And the boy said, "Well, you said it was supposed to be a flight to Egypt." I'm not done. The teacher said, "I see 4 people there. I see Joseph, I see Mary holding the baby, but there's another man. Who's that?" The little boy said, that's Pontius, the pilot. Now I'm done. Okay. The chapel sermons of the college this semester, starting right about now, have been on the theme of under pressure. And so, while preparing this sermon, I thought about Pilate. He was under pressure. And that's why we picked out that title today. Pilate was a man under pressure. What kind of pressure did he have? He was pressured by the demands of the Jewish leaders. He was pressured by the mob. He was under the aspect of the appeal of his wife to have nothing to do with this man. And he's also under pressure from his own conscience. Because even though Pilate was brutal, he still had a conscience at times, and he demonstrated in this event. And he also had one more. That was a big one. That was the fear of the emperor Tiberius back in Rome. That's pressure, especially the one perhaps involving his wife. All right, down to two observations now. I'm going to move some things forward on the PowerPoint back there. Okay, we'll get to that. Okay, not quite there yet. Two observations. So while preparing this sermon, I did this. I like numbers. I like to count. And I noticed that the role that Pilate has in the judgment scenes about Jesus are developed more completely by John than the other Gospels. John uses a total of 35 verses. Next closest is Luke. He has 24 verses, including those incidental references to Pilate back in Luke 3, when he gives the setting for the Jesus ministry, being the days of Tiberius Caesar and Pontius Pilate. And also Luke 13, when it says, when the people ask a question, what about those Galileans whose blood Pilate mingled with the sacrifices? And then Matthew has 22, Mark has 18 verses. But as I read through the Gospels, I noticed something else. The Pilate was a man who asked questions. So I went back and read all four Gospels again, counted the question marks. Pilate was being asked to make a decision about the life of Jesus, and probably it's a good idea to ask questions. I discovered again, John's out in front. John has 10 questions. Mark has 5 questions. Matthew has 4, and Luke has 2. Some of them overlap within the Gospels, but that's what they are. Pilate then himself has 2 questions. One's in the printed text we will have here after a while. As he said in John 18, what is truth? And in Matthew, Jesus asked the one who will be a part of the conclusion today, what shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ? All right, that's a summary. I'm through with these statistics. Now let's go on. Point number 1. Let's examine the life of Pilate, both the facts and some of the fiction. What did Pilate look like? Real answer is probably we don't know, but let's take some pictures. Next. That's the one you find if you go into Wikipedia. I also find it in another encyclopedia article. Sort of a nice-looking guy. Typical Roman magistrate of some kind, governor, prefect over Judea. And then, as shown in a YouTube clip, you'll be seeing that again later. I'm not sure I like that picture. Because anytime you want to show a guy who's bad, you show him as bald. And then if you remember the movie, The Passion of Christ. Oh, that's what that one is. And then there's another movie out now with Pilate looking like this. And I looked at that one and thought, that looks a little bit more like the original. They tried hard to imitate that. Okay, let's move on. Next one. What are the evidences that Pilate existed? Is there anything outside of the Bible? Yes. By the way, there's been an article recently in Biblical Archaeological Review, sort of a major biblical archaeology magazine, that had an article entitled 57 People of the New Testament Who Have Been Verified by Archaeology. Pilate is one of them. What are the evidences for him? Number 1, a Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, wrote about Pilate, and he was very critical of Pilate, and he lived at exactly the same time as Pilate, and even beyond the time when Pilate died. Number two, he is cited by a Roman historian called Titus. Titus wrote about the reigns of 3 Roman emperors, Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero. And Pilate is involved in the reigns of Tiberius especially, and Claudius to a certain extent. Next, Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian, and his story by itself is interesting, but roughly just before 100 BC, he was writing the history of the Jews. He started back in the Garden of Eden and came all the way up to the time of the fall of Jerusalem, AD 70. He either had a tremendous mind or many resources. He did a great job. But in 2 of his histories that he wrote, Antiquities and the Wars of the Jews, he mentions Pilate. Here's one more. Coins that were minted in the days of Pilate. His name's not on them, but the date is there, and the coins by him have been found in 3 different places in Israel. What kind of a man was Pilate? He was very brutal. People did not like to be appointed, or actually they bid the job to the Roman Senate, and you sometimes wonder why he did it, but maybe he thought, I'll settle those Jews. Governors did not particularly like to go to govern Judea. Those Jews were stubborn. They had peculiar religious ways. They would not acknowledge the emperor of Rome as a king because their king was God. And I think Pilate thought, I'm up to that. I'll show them a thing or two. And this is one of the things that Pilate did, even though he had been warned not to do it, and previous governors had learned by experience it's not a good idea, because the Jews had one of the 10 commandments that said, you shall not have any graven image. On top of the standards of the various army groups, there was often an image of the emperor. And the Jews had made it clear they did not want any images of the emperor in Jerusalem or anything else. No birds, no animals. Pilate did this. He brought the images of the emperor on those standards into Jerusalem, but he did it at night so they wouldn't see it. And he made an assumption. His assumption was that if they're already here and they haven't seen them come in, they'll just accept them. But they did not. Instead, Pilate had sent them from Caesarea, where he was living at that time, and the Jews, many of them got together and made the trip to Caesarea, about 50 or 60 miles, and appealed to Pilate day after day after day to take those standards out of Jerusalem. He finally got tired of it. And so he's going to turn to brutality. He has his soldiers concealed in the arena where he was speaking, behind his speaker stand. At a given signal, he told his soldiers to unsheath their swords, and he's ready to kill all the Jews in front of him. They then did something he did not expect. They all just fell to the ground and exposed their necks, and they were ready to have their necks and their heads severed from their bodies for their faith. Pilate was so impressed by their faith, he'd never seen anything like this before, that he told the soldiers to put their swords back into their sheaths. Yes, several evidences, but here's one more. It's a big one. Back in 1961, they were doing some building around Caesarea. And here's an old stone, part of an old building. It had been used as a step. And they were taking it away and clearing this building out to make ready for another one. And somebody noticed some writing on the underneath part of the step. And they got to examining it, and they found it had these things on it. It had the name Pilate. It had the name of Tiberius, and is also saying that this building is being dedicated to the emperor. That's a big one. Now they actually had it in writing by Pilate himself. Let's go to the next one. Where was Pilate born? No one knows. Tradition cites central Italy, and that's probably the best. because it was part of his name. Pontius Pilate, probably born in that area. But when nobody knows, and other places try to come up with legends, local traditions, that Pilate was born there. And so even in Spain and Germany, and the one that really boggled my mind was this one, Scotland. Pilate was born in Scotland. I have a tough time believing that. Okay, next, what happened to Pilate later in life? Well, one time he tangled with some Samaritans and he was excessively brutal. It was so bad that the Emperor Tiberius called him back to Rome. Probably he's going to depose him, maybe execute him. But before Pilate could get there, Tiberius died in March AD 37. So Pilate got there, and now what's the next emperor going to do? Caligula. He evidently lets the case go for a while, but then people put the history together and put it something like this, that he as an emperor sent word out to Pilate, you become a menace to the empire, a nuisance to the emperor himself. Why don't you just go end your life? And he did. The Romans were experts in knowing how to take their own lives as well. And by the way, the women, Roman women, were experts in using poison to get rid of their husbands. If you didn't like one, saw another you liked better, you could get rid of your husband. And they didn't have all the pathological things we have today to determine that such things really happen. Okay, so then Pilate's dead. What happened then? They tried to bury him in the Tiber River at Rome. And the legend says this, that the demons of the river just rose up and rejected the body from the river. Pilate was so evil. Then they took him to the Rhone River up in France. It empties out into the Mediterranean. Tried to bury him again. Same thing happened. So finally they took him to a lake in Switzerland and buried him, and he stayed down that time. It's hard to keep a bad man down. It really is. But there are also some stories that have arisen about Pilate later, 200 or 300 years later. Some decided, his wife and Pilate probably became Christians. That changed from a probably to they did. And his wife was elevated to sainthood by one group of people. And then later, Pilate himself was named as a saint. Okay, all of that is just background about Pilate. Now you know something about the man. Maybe the scriptures will be a little bit more plain to you. At this point, then, we're going to have this YouTube. It's from several clips from the movie, Passion. And then afterwards, I'll probably be reading some of the same scriptures again. But after seeing it, maybe you'll understand. Okay.
Mentre cedette volt. Cur. Quid fecisti? Rexes tu?
Regnum meum non est Deo mundo. Si esset, utas ministri mei istos sic tradere mei. Isent.
Ant malca. Ergo rexes tu.
Ego not nasus sum. Testimonium veritati per ebeo. Omnes qui veritatem audiunt. Vocem meam audiunt.
Veritas. Quid est veritas? Kiam anachna nachaksim beit esurin. Ratsekaya Baraba. Bain Antun Yesus Bilkom. Ratseka Baraba. O Yeshua. Crime Shiaka.
Jesi Baraba!
Im Yeshua Ansaret.
Jetzt der Lev!
vedo castigarsi o severo siete venader. Sed non sinere eos eon uccidere. Potesse smihite per crucifiggere e per liberare.
Hentische Sibyles Ganna! Olkabel, la Tehewe, Re, Kaiser, Hashkuthak, die Salem!
Antun Teheon di Bain, frate. Avudule Antun. Anasa Kumin Dama di Anasha. Avenader. Fuck kontrollen.
Okay. I discovered it's one of my classes, Restoration History, if I may perhaps lecture on something, then show a video about it, they seem to get more out of it. Today I'm going to do it backwards. You've seen the DVD first. Now I'm going to read you again. And what I'm going to read is this. There's a book called The Daily Bible, put together by an attorney, Christian attorney, and he has taken all four Gospels and synthesized them into one continuous narrative. He does a good job. I'm going to, rather than reinvent the wheel, just read again what you just saw to a certain extent. After Jesus had trials before the Romans, before Annas, the old priest, Caiaphas, his son-in-law, and then the Roman Sanhedrin, he was turned over to Pilate, and it begins like this. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. By now, it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace, sometimes called the Praetorium. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" This answer is a classic. "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." They didn't answer the question. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Christ, a king." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Interjection. Throughout much of his ministry, Jesus indicated that he was going to die. He would rise again the third day. He was going to die in Jerusalem, as many of the prophets did. But finally, when Jesus is on the way to Jerusalem for the last time, as he comes near the city of Jericho, where he's going to meet Zacchaeus and the blind man Bartimaeus, Jesus finally said he would be delivered up to the hands of the Gentiles. That would be a death by crucifixion. Jesus finally said it, and he's saying this to fulfill prophecy, and it happens that way. By the way, that beating that you saw, that was a Roman beating. There's a difference. When the Romans beat you, they're under no restrictions. The purpose was brutality, just to make you suffer, that's all. And they would beat you until the arm of the beaters wore out, or if you got tired, another guy could take up and do it for a while. When the Jews beat you, they were restricted to no more than 40 lashes or beatings with the rod. Jewish beating was for discipline. It was to teach you not to sin again, not to do this evil thing again. The Romans, it was just to make you suffer. That's what Jesus endured at the hands of the Gentiles. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priest who handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now, my kingdom is from another place." "Oh, you are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You are right, saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." When he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Pilate sent him to Herod, and I'll skip all that. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for I suffer a great deal today in a dream because of him." Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I've examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod. He's done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I'll punish him and then release him." The people then chose the release of Barabbas. I'm skipping over some of that. And then you have this question from Matthew: "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. "I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I'll have him punished and then released." But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I'm bringing out him to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." And when Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man. I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." Ooh, when Pilate heard that, he was even more afraid and went back inside the palace. Let me explain. The Romans believed that there were sometimes cohabitations between the gods and human beings, and perhaps Jesus was something like that, a product of that. This makes a Roman who is superstitious to be more fearful. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave no answer. Pilate said, "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It's your responsibility. All the people answered, let his blood be on us and on our children. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. Carrying his own cross, he went out. Are the things for us in all of that today? Well, there are many things. Here are some of them. Just the power of pressure. We've already talked a little about Pilate, the pressure he had from the Jewish leaders, the Jewish people, from his wife, from the emperor at Rome, and his own conscience. But the power of pressure. Pilate knew what he should do, and he made the wrong choice. Pilate yielded to the political pressure in the statement made by the Jews, if you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. And the pressure by the Jews finally outweighed any principles of right and wrong that Pilate held. So what about you? Do you face pressures? Somewhere in your life? At work? In society? At home? If you're a school person, maybe in schools. Are they trying to compel you to do what is right before God? Or to violate your conscience? Some people will reason that they'll yield today and do better tomorrow. But others know now, when you yield once, you're weak. Just pile on the pressure and you'll break. Some people do and some people don't. Years ago, I heard about a story of a man who was working in a factory, and he was instructed in this way. When the various things that we have produced here as a product come to you to evaluate, to test, to make sure they meet governmental standards, even if it doesn't, you put down that they did, or you lose your job. That's pressure. This man quit his job. Not everyone would do that, but you get the idea. There's also that factor of truth. Pilate said it in a question that we have to answer today. What is truth? Because you see, we're living in an age when people are saying there is no such thing as absolute truth. All truth is relevant. What's true to you may not be true to me. There's just enough truth in that to be somewhat true. But today, the only question many people ask is this: does it work? Does it make me feel good? Does it get me what I want? And you can see how people who ostensibly belong to Christ ask this, combined to this mentality. Is the church a good church because it feels good to go there? Because it has programs you like? Or because this congregation believes and proclaims and stands on the truth of God's Word? That doesn't happen everywhere, and often it's concealed, and the men who preach concealed messages like that, I can understand why they're still trying to be in the pulpit. The standard of God's truth has been replaced by the standard of personal preference. I like it, must be good. The result is an entire generation of people chasing the wind. If you want to stand in the storms, you have to have an anchor, and that anchor is the Word of God. The anchor is that unchanging truth. Finally, it comes down to be Jesus who said, I am the truth. And you have to believe that. Pilate asked the right question. It's a question we have to ask as well. What is our standard of truth? How do we determine what is right and what is wrong? Does the Bible really provide your standard of truth? Or is that what we say, but we don't take it into our practice? Today, we have many people who can be cited as examples of people who stood for the truth. Some of you are old enough to remember a movie, Chariots of Fire. It was about a man from Scotland who had grown up in China because his parents were missionaries there. His name was Eric Liddell. In the 1924 Summer Olympics in Paris, Liddell, who was a specialist in the 100-meter run, to his dismay found out it was scheduled to be held on Sunday. And he had a conscience that to him said, I can't run, I can't compete, I can't do this on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. And he didn't. He got pressure from all sides. How can you do that to your country? How can you do that to Great Britain? But there was a 400-meter race. It wasn't a specialty. It was held on a Monday, and he ran in it, and to everybody's surprise, he won. And then, after he went back to China, after a couple of furloughs to his home back in Scotland, he went back to China again, and he was there when the Japanese came, and they put him in a concentration camp or an internment prison, and he died while still in prison before the war ended. There's another one. Baseball player. Some of you here probably remember this guy. Sandy Koufax pitched for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and when he was on, he was practically unhittable. He had some bad days when the ball wouldn't do what he wanted. But it was the first day of the World Series in 1965, October 6th. But it also was a Jewish holiday, the most sacred day of the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement. The Jews call it in America Yom Kippur. And Sandy Koufax said to the manager, Walter Austin, sorry, I can't pitch that day. He pitched a couple other games later and helped the Dodgers win that series, but he would not pitch on the Day of Atonement. To him, it was very special. And there was another fellow after him named Steve Stone. Steve Stone was also a Jew, and this happened because of what Sandy Koufax did. Steve Stone, who pitched for the Baltimore Orioles, took it one step farther. He would not pitch on the Jewish holiday Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, or the Day of Atonement. Sometimes your example means a lot. Pilate set a very poor example. What kind of example are you setting? One more. A few years ago, we had 3 young women who came to Bible college here in Moberly. But I'm old enough that I knew their grandfather. Their grandfather played football in high school. And the grandfather, he's one of those 310 Christians. He went to the church building 3 times a week, and he gave probably 10% of his income, if he had any. He was there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And one time during the football season, a game was postponed because of the weather, very bad weather. It was an away game, and some of the hills where he lived in southeastern Indiana, it was a little bit hard to get there on icy roads, so they did not go. But the game was rescheduled for a Wednesday night. And so Vernon went to the preacher and said, how am I supposed to do? I always go to church on Wednesday nights. And the preacher said, it has to be your choice. I can't make it for you. And when the preacher went to the church building on Wednesday night, he wondered, would Vernon be there? He was. Even in spite of all the threats by the coach, I'll bench you, I'll kick you off the team, and intimidation from his other players on the team, Vernon went to church. The next year, Vernon's senior year, the same thing happened again, only this time. The game was rescheduled to be in his hometown. And you know what happened? Basically nothing except this. Oh, nothing means this time the coach made no threats. He knew what Vernon was going to do. Other players knew what he was going to do. He had set a great example, and the coach did say this to Vernon. When church is over, please hurry to the football field as fast as you can, and I think you'll be able to play the second half. So what kind of example are you setting in faithfulness to Jesus Christ? The challenges for each of us today are very strong in all of our activities. And your conscience probably knows what's wrong and what's right. But there's another question today. It's the big question. What will you do with Jesus today? Are you here today without Jesus Christ? You've never been baptized into him? Or what about tomorrow when you have to make some of those decisions? Right now, I'm after this question. Maybe somebody here today would like to be baptized. Is this the day for you to make that decision? As we used to say, no matter what you decide, you have to make a decision. You can decide to put it off, accept Christ today, or never accept him at all. Are you willing to be baptized into Christ and make your life to be the kind of life that God the Father wants and that you would want to have when you would stand not in Pilate's hall, but in the halls of justice of God? Let's sing your invitation song just now. Just remember, what would Jesus do? Remember those letters? Ask yourself that question. What would Jesus want you to do right now?
Morning, a song I didn't know before Mr. Pelfrey requested it from us, but I think some of you will know it. As we consider that question, what will you do with Jesus?
Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless, forsaken, betrayed by all. Hearken, what beateth the sudden call? What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will you do with me? Will you evade him as Pilate tried? Or will you choose him whate'er betide? Vainly you struggle from him to hide. What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me? Will you, like Peter, your Lord deny? Or will you scorn from his foes to fly? Daring for Jesus to live or die. What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me? Jesus, I give thee my heart today. Jesus, I'll follow thee all the way. Gladly obeying you, will you say, this will I do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me?
You can be seated. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. In the book of John, we've been working our way through it this year, all year, and we see that there is this bread that feeds more than our physical hunger. Jesus once said in some of these verses that we've looked at throughout the year. But in chapter 4, he said, I have food to eat which you do not know about. And 4 chapters later, in chapter 8, he says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. In between those 2 chapters, in 6, he said, my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. And so what is that true bread this morning? He added in the next verse, the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. 2 verses later, he says this, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. And Jesus also said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. We answer Pilate's question, what is truth, this morning, by looking to Christ himself. We don't just seek more knowledge today. Spiritual truth is in a person, not just the things we know, because Jesus, it says, is the truth. And so today we're sitting here around this table again. Our confidence and trust should be in the person of Jesus himself. We must know him. After all, Paul said, I know whom I've believed. It was Jesus who gave Paul his confidence to face the trouble, the persecution, all the stuff he was to endure with boldness. And he can help us through all that stuff in our life as well today. He's the one we remember today around this table. He's the one who said, do this in remembrance of me. And so let's take this moment now to sing, to be reminded of the one in whom we believe and by whom we've been redeemed. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed by his infinite mercy. His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed. His child and forever I am. I think of my blessed Redeemer. I think of him all the day long. I sing, for I cannot be silent. His love is the theme of my song. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. I know I shall see in his beauty the King in whose law I delight, who lovingly guardeth my footsteps and giveth me songs in the night. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. His child and forever I
Of life's demand, shameful sin placed on him, the hope of every man.
Oh, the blood of Jesus washes me. Oh, the blood of Jesus shed for me. What a sacred
saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory. Savior, Son, Holy One, slain so I can live. Oh, see the Lamb, the great I am, who takes away my sin. Oh, the blood of Jesus washes me. Oh, the blood of Jesus shed for me. What a sacrifice that saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory. Oh, the blood of the Lamb. Oh, the blood of the Lamb. Oh, the blood of the Lamb. The precious blood of the Lamb. What a sacrifice that saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory. What love, no greater love, grace, how can it be that in my sin, yes, even then, He shed His blood for me. Oh, the blood of Jesus washes me. Oh, the blood of Jesus shed for me. What a sacrifice that saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory. Oh, what a sacrifice that saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory.
right after the service today, our second hour, not this hour, but after second hour, we'll be having our newcomers lunch. And so if you've RSVP'd to stay for that, we'll be back here in that corner of the building in room 405, 406. So we're thankful to have several people sticking around getting to know our church. If you are new here today and you're a visitor, we're really glad you decided to join us today. And we'd be glad to invite you to that meal. If you just happen to pop in today, just come see me after the service so we can have a place prepared for you. We also want to remind you this coming weekend is Go Fest, and the Global Outreach Festival is something that's going to take place on the Saturday morning, basically from about 7:30 until noon. And the first thing that'll happen that day is the breakfast, and you can show up here anytime between 7:30 and 11 and enjoy pancakes, bacon, things like that. It's all going to be here in the auditorium. It'll be donation-based, so you just give what you can to support global outreach. And at 8:30 then we'll be having a 5K. Tomorrow is the last day to register. If you register by tomorrow, then you get your breakfast included in the price of your registration. So you can go to the 5K, come in and eat breakfast, or we give you enough time, you can go home and shower and come back and have breakfast if you'd rather do that. But that'll be at 8:30. And there's some forms out there at the info center if you would like to register for that today and leave it with us. You can do that. Just fill it out, write your check, and then just leave it there at the info center, and we'll pick them up later. Now, at 9:30, we have some demonstrations here. We'll have some things set up for sale that people are donating, craft items, canned goods, things like that, bake sale. And so you can come at 9:30 and kind of make it a morning where you have breakfast and look at some of the demonstrations and things. We're hoping if the weather cooperates and everything, we'll have some pony rides outside that your kids could enjoy. And then at 10:30, we have our talent show and live auction. There's still sign-up sheets out there. If you are someone who wanted to sign up and haven't done that yet, stop by the info center and put your name there on the clipboard. Obviously, we still have room for auction items. We also still have some room for talents if you'd like to sign up to do that. We'd be really happy to have you as part of that. And like I say, we'll wrap up the morning next week by noon. So we know there's a lot of stuff going on. We know we're competing against some other events in the area. But hope you'll be able to come and join us if you're in town for part of that or all of it, whatever you're able to do. The last thing we're leaving you with this morning, you can see on the screen, the Veterans Breakfast. If you're a veteran or a spouse of a veteran, you're invited to a free breakfast on Veterans Day. They'd just like you to sign up at the info center on the clipboard so they know how many are coming. So we thank our Veterans Ministry for putting that on each year and honoring all of those men and women who've served in our armed forces. So that's all we have for you this morning. Thanks for being here today. Thank you so much to Mr. Pelfrey for bringing our message today. Have a great week, everyone. God bless you. There is power